Federal Trade Commission rule against employee non-compete clauses was supposed to take effect this week, but there's an injunction against it issued by a Texas federal court. The Supreme Court ruling that ended the Chevron deference, or the court deference to federal agency regulation, throws more sand into the FTC works. With what industry is watching here, we turn to the Executive Vice President for Policy at the Professional Services Council, Stephanie Kostro. And that rule was again today, I guess, right, on non-compete. So what are you thinking about? What are you watching here?
Tom, thanks for having me. And I appreciate that you're talking both about the Chevron deference decision from the Supreme Court in conjunction with this FTC rule. As you mentioned, this final rule came out months ago and it was supposed to take effect today, September 4th. But there are several cases out there in the courts that contractors are watching very, very closely. One of them was there in the Northern District of Texas, where the judge had originally issued a preliminary injunction, which just impacted the plaintiffs in the case. And then more recently here on August 20th, the judge applied that injunction nationwide, which means this FTC rule on non-competes does not go into effect today. And in these cases, whether it's in Texas or Pennsylvania or elsewhere, the judges have been looking at this Chevron deference overturned by the Supreme Court. And what that means is, back in 1984, the Supreme Court said, if the law or statute is ambiguous, then you can use the agency's reasonable interpretation. They had some flexibility to interpret how to apply what kind of authority that they had. What the Supreme Court most recently decided here in June is that, no, don't defer to the agencies. You just have to go by the letter of the law. And that's going to throw a lot of sand in a lot of works. The FTC seems to be just the first one out of the gate.
And this law, or this rule rather, against non-competes doesn't seem to be rooted in any statute, but rather just because the FTC chair doesn't like it.
That's exactly right. What the plaintiffs have alleged, and it sounds like it's the judges have agreed in some cases, is that there is no specific authority for the FTC to issue this kind of rule, to say that you're banning non-compete clauses except for the most senior executives in the company. From a contractor perspective, this is problematic, and PSC submitted comments back when this was a proposed rule. And one of the comments that we submitted and that we take very, very seriously is that when a contractor puts together a proposal for a federal agency, they have to identify key personnel. And those key personnel shouldn't change from the time you submit a proposal to the time you do the work. If you don't have a non-compete clause that keeps those employees somewhat attached to the company, you could really, really throw sand in the company's works, right? And they could get in trouble for not having those key personnel anymore. So that's the kind of issue the contractors are watching. I would say many of them heaved a very big sigh of relief that the Texas court issued an injunction here, and we'll see how it develops. We'll see how the FTC responds. Right,
and you point to something important for contractors, and that is the crucial person may not be a senior executive of the company. They could be the person who is the best programmer of communication protocols or something, and they could be very valuable even though they're not senior.
Exactly. The officials who are exempt originally from this FTC final rule are people like the company president or CEO. It's not the program manager who you have actually doing the work on a government contract. And so we saw this have an outsized potential impact on small businesses where they only have a few employees, right? And so if you don't have a non-compete clause that somehow ties them to the company, as a government contractor, you could get in a lot of hot water.
We're speaking with Stephanie Kostro. She's Executive Vice President for Policy at the Professional Services Council. And on another rule, which the State Department has issued as interim final, which I never quite understand that reasoning, but nevertheless it is interim final. And this has to do with enabling trade cooperation among Australia, the UK, and the United States, this AUKUS kind of idea to bolster our presence, I guess, below China, if you will. This rule is something you're looking at also. Give us the particulars of what it does and how it affects contractors.
Thanks, Tom. This interim final rule is near and dear to my heart as someone who's tracked export controls and specifically more recently the AUKUS Trilateral Security Partnership very closely. And so what the interim final rule does is it creates an exemption for Australia, UK, and in some cases Canada, which has long had an exemption from ITAR, certain defense articles and defense service exports with Canada. It creates also a excluded technologies list, or they call it ETL, where, those are ones that we do have to have additional scrutiny, and they're not just pushing the easy button to have Australia and the UK have access to this. But there are authorized users. There's a process for creating the opportunity for re-exports and retransfers, et cetera. Long story short, Tom, this AUKUS trilateral security partnership is a fantastic idea by the three countries, not only to be able to co-develop, co-sustain, operate together, be interoperable, etc., but it also is sending a message to potential adversaries like China that we are serious and we are a coalition of the willing, if you will, but also really in lockstep with each other. And I think what we need to do here is look at this interim final rule, submit comments by mid-November, which is where the comments are due, and then really have some near-term successes. And that's where PSC and our contractors who are members want to see some near-term successes to really hammer that message home to China.
And by the way, what do we know about the Australian defense industry? I mean, people sometimes are surprised to realize that not just France and Germany and to some extent Great Britain, but Norway, Sweden, Finland, a lot of these nations you wouldn't think have really strong development capabilities for weapons platforms. You can see them at the Army show. They have exhibits every year. What about Australia? Do they have what we would want to buy, or do we just want to sell to them, do you think?
It's a combination, to be honest, Tom. And what we're looking really in the U.S.-Australia relationship is what can we do together, because they do have some comparative advantages in certain areas of emerging technology, et cetera. And so as we look at what we can do together, co-development, co-sustainment, co-production, et cetera, and really helping them to figure out how they can sustain those submarines that we'll be helping them get as part of this AUKUS partnership. That's what we're looking at. And to be honest, we've had government support from the Australians, UK, and US government officials to create what is called an Advanced Capabilities Industry Forum. PSC is one of 4 US-based trade associations alongside our Australian trade associations and UK trade associations. We all get together regularly and we talk about exactly this. How can we leverage each other? What are we going to buy from each other? So I think it's a great question, Tom. It's still nascent at this stage.
And you hinted at something really important, and that is the sustainment capabilities. It's great to give a nuclear submarine to a country or sell it to them, but the challenge for those things is as much sustainment and safe operation over long term as building in the first place. And not too many nations have that capability.
That's exactly right. And what you don't want to have to do is have a submarine, in
Sink.
Australia and have to bring it back all the way to the United States for maintenance, right? So you can't really do that. And so creating that capability within Australia is really going to be critical.
Stephanie Kostro is Executive Vice President for Policy at the Professional Services Council. As always, thanks so much.
Thanks, Tom.
And we'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.